Did you know that less than 25% of organizations are effective at generating and executing workforce plans that are required to support their long-term goals and objectives? Workday Adaptive Planning is a collaborative, continuous, and comprehensive workforce planning solution that ensures organizations can drive towards their strategy with the right number of resources and optimal mix of talent. In order for workforce planning to be successful, it must involve participation and input from a wide variety of stakeholders throughout the organization. This is why we often like to say it's one plan that supports multiple perspectives. For example, finance will be involved in setting and allocating top-down strategic plan targets. These targets will be compiled at a higher level of detail than the bottom-up operational workforce plans compiled by functional leaders and stewarded by HR. Since all plan versions are centrally located and easily accessible from the cloud, you can seamlessly compare top-down strategic targets with bottom-up workforce plans and assess headcount and cost variances in real time. From a consolidated perspective, executive leadership needs to obtain context and confidence in how bottom-up workforce plans align with strategic targets. Conditional formatting rules make it easy to spot misalignment between functional plans and corporate targets. And with Workday Adaptive Planning, analysis is supported at any level of detail in your plan. For example, if the leader of research and development was thinking of requesting an additional open position as part of the annual workforce planning process, they could simply access this dashboard and see that the workforce plan is already trending one headcount over target. Additionally, the financial analyst supporting research and development could further investigate the $18,900 variance and drill into the underlying details, not only to understand the specific group within research and development that has incurred the additional cost, but even drill down to the exact position that is driving the variance. This level of visibility is required in order to ensure that resourcing decisions made at functional levels can support day-to-day operations and strategic initiatives. Simultaneously, all stakeholders will also obtain insight into the costs associated with staffing up and optimizing the workforce. Speaking of optimizing your workforce, the number of workers you have available to execute on your long-term goals and objectives, or in other words, your workforce plan supply, is only part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the future workforce plan demand. Leveraging Workday Adaptive Planning enables organizations to determine their future workforce plan demand in a variety of ways. First of all, Workday Adaptive Planning doesn't play favorites. Due to its agnostic nature, it can ingest data from any external source and utilize that data to inform and drive future workforce plan demand. This is imperative for organizations that may see correlations between economic factors like commodity prices and future workforce plan demand. Second, at its core, Workday Adaptive Planning is an interconnected, driver-based enterprise planning solution. This essentially means you can make an adjustment in one area of your plan, and it will have a pervasive impact throughout your entire model. We will see an example of real-time demand sensitivity analysis in just a few moments. Immediately understanding the impact of your plan changes on workforce plan demand enables your organization to pivot quickly and execute the appropriate actions to narrow the gap between workforce plan supply and demand. And the third way of leveraging our solution to inform future workforce plan demand will involve intelligent planning functionality, specifically machine learning forecasting capabilities that have been outlined on our roadmap and will become generally available in the near future. Workday Adaptive Planning machine learning can be leveraged to determine future demand based on historical actuals. This dashboard graph is showing the machine learning generated demand based on an analysis of historical headcount. The number at the top of each column represents the predicted demand based on historical headcount by job family. We can see the job families along the bottom axis of this graph. It's important to note that organizations will also have the flexibility to remove the impact of seasonal fluctuations when leveraging historical data sets for future predictions. This will in turn increase the accuracy of your future workforce plan demand predictions. The machine learning forecast prediction can be run on any account. So in addition to predicting future workforce plan demand based on historical headcount, it can also be run on historical attrition. By taking into consideration historical attrition, we can now see the additional increase in projected headcount. Workday Adaptive Planning also recognizes that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. Therefore, you can override the machine learning forecasting calculation for a specific account and level of your plan if required. In this example, we can adjust the workforce plan for the operations level of the organization. We may want to take into consideration the prior year impact of COVID on unusually high turnover. Additionally, we may want to also adjust customer services based on a new process or technology that's going to reduce our reliance on the number of customer service reps required. And we can do the same type of adjustment for the sales level of the plan and adjust for increased attrition among sales associates during the last 2 quarters of the year. And once again, we can immediately assess the impact of plan adjustments on final workforce plan demand, and therefore workforce plan surplus and deficit, which speaks to the real-time and interconnected nature of our workforce planning solution. The real-time nature of our solution also makes scenario planning or what-if analysis a breeze. With Workday Adaptive Planning, you can spin up a new plan version in record time. As you can see, this new plan version is exactly the same as the version that we just copied. However, the difference here is that we're going to adjust our assumptions associated with our 2A what-if version. We're going to go ahead and increase the attrition for the facilities team under operations for the year ended 2023. We can put in a description and then adjust the final year amount to 50%. What if scenario analysis does not get any quicker or easier than this? Additionally, there's no limit on the number of planning versions you can create to assess the impact of changing your plan drivers. Therefore, you can create as many scenarios as you require in order to assess the impact of proposed workforce changes and obtain context and confidence in your plan. Even in the face of a constantly evolving business landscape, HR can advise on the right resourcing decisions faster, enabling your organization to pivot quickly when it needs to. In addition to resource counts and capacity, organizations also need to have real-time insights into the depth and diversity of existing talent, as well as the skills and competencies required to meet future business demands. Without visibility into how workforce talent supply aligns with future talent demand, HR and business leaders cannot assess critical capability gaps, let alone determine the optimal course of action to close those gaps. With Workday Adaptive Planning, you can analyze talent gaps across varying levels of granularity. For example, we can drill into talent gaps by job family, and then within the sales job family, we can drill in by job profile. Immediately, we can see that there is a surplus of regional sales managers, which is offset by the deficit of all other job profiles in the sales family, including the vice president sales position, which is considered critical. Now, if an HR business partner supporting the sales organization was looking at this level of detail, they would probably already be thinking about which regional sales managers could potentially be identified as succession candidates for the VP sales position. However, before that HRBP can make any decisions on how to optimize the workforce, they would need to understand the specific skills and workers associated with each one of these job profiles. Data used to create this dashboard can be leveraged from any external HRIS or talent solution. You can easily leverage the data from third-party systems and load it into Workday Adaptive Planning, or you can choose to embed a hyperlink on this dashboard, such as the one we see here. This hyperlink will direct you to an external drive or repository where the information is saved. Now, this particular graph will identify surpluses or shortages by job profile and critical skill. We can see that critical skills are located on the left-hand side of the graph. There's also a rating scale across the x-axis. So essentially, everything to the right of the 0 on the rating scale is going to represent a surplus of that particular skill. And because the graph is color-coded by job profile, we can easily see that there is a surplus of skills held by regional sales managers, and all other sales job profiles are facing a skills deficit. This is consistent with the other data we have seen so far. We can also focus on a particular skill, such as negotiation. We can see that the regional sales managers have a surplus of negotiation skills, whereas the vice president sales position has a shortage of negotiation skills. This supports a succession planning strategy. However, if an HRBP wanted to pursue this particular workforce action, they would still need to understand which particular regional sales managers have a surplus of negotiation skills so that they can consider those individuals alone as succession candidates for the VP sales role. By navigating to the source data, which is a skills gap analysis by organization report, the HR business partner will now have visibility to the specific workers that contain a surplus of skills and are also considered regional sales managers. So here we can see that Brandon Harris, Tyler, and Nobu are the 3 individuals that have a surplus of negotiation skills. Now let's go ahead and access the worker profile for Brandon. Keep in mind that this particular worker profile is from Workday HCM, but this information would also be contained in any of your third-party HRIS or talent solutions. And the worker profile is going to show information that is going to be pivotal for a succession planning strategy. So first of all, we can confirm Brandon's business title. He is a regional sales manager. He's quite tenured in his position. He's been in his role for over 22 years. Additional talent information that we may leverage for strategic skills planning is going to include performance ratings as well as promotion potential. We can also see that his achievable level is 1 to 2 levels. So as a manager, it would not be out of scope if we were to add him to a succession pool for a VP sales position. And although it may not be applicable in this particular strategy, we can also see that Brandon is willing to relocate internationally. So this is important because this is also going to speak to an alternate strategy where we can address strategic skills gaps through relocation or transferring employees. So for all intensive purposes, it appears that Brandon is going to be a good succession candidate for the VP sales role. Now, other options to address strategic skills gaps would also be upskilling existing workers that have large skills gaps. Upskilling would likely take the form of training and education programs. This particular graph identifies workers by the total number of skills gaps. We can see that Brandon Harris is a top performer as he doesn't have many skills gaps. Another strategy for addressing critical skills gaps is going to be considering relocation or transfers of existing workers. And once again, this is going to be dependent on whether or not the workers are open to taking on international assignments. For example, we saw that Brandon was open to it. Now here we can see that Paris appears to have the largest number of skills gaps by location, whereas some Canadian locations such as Toronto and Vancouver have a lower number of skills gaps. Essentially, this means they have a higher number of skilled workers. So the organization could consider transferring skilled workers from Canada to Paris. And finally, there will always be a time and cost component associated with strategic workforce planning decisions. Sometimes the skills you require are not available internally in your organization, or it would take too long to develop them. In this case, consideration must be given to acquiring external talent through recruiting activities. Now, all the workforce actions that you can undertake to close strategic talent gaps, whether it's succession planning or upskilling, transfers, recruiting for new open positions, or potentially restructuring, all of these can be modeled in Workday Adaptive Planning as different scenarios. So let's go ahead and look at an example of how an organization could model proposed workforce actions to close critical skills gaps. Let's follow along with Brandon Harris as our succession planning candidate. By navigating to the Develop and Upskill tab and filtering on Brandon Harris out of our current workers, we can now leverage configurable sheets in Workday Adaptive Planning and indicate that we want to include Brandon as a candidate for succession planning. So we'll go ahead and adjust that toggle switch, and as soon as we save our changes, we'll see that Brandon has been identified as a succession candidate. This is important because he will now not be picked up in any other strategy, such as a relocation strategy, in other areas of the plan. So next, let's also look at how an organization could potentially model acquiring additional talent. On the Growth and Recruiting tab, we can see that there are 3 positions that are currently rolling out to the Sales Operations Group. And we can see that the position status is planned. The hiring reason has also been indicated as new positions. So this would be an example where an organizational leader could potentially request new positions as part of their annual workforce planning process. So the only thing we're really missing here is the position start and target hire date. This is going to be important to indicate because this is going to impact the financial impact or cost assumptions around recruiting for these additional headcount. Now, once again, we've gone ahead and saved our changes. And once those changes are committed, what we're going to see is that our dashboard has dynamically updated. And furthermore, we have the ability to analyze the overall impact of these proposed changes. And not just from a headcount perspective, but also from a total cost of workforce perspective. So here we can see with the embedded variance analysis calculations that we can also assess the cost of workforce impact as compared to our previous version or scenario where the changes were not incorporated. And we can also see the impact on FTE as well as headcount. And this is important because FTE is going to be a metric that finance is usually interested in. On the Strategic Workforce Planning Actions tab, we can summarize all the workforce actions that we have the ability to incorporate or model in our plan prior to executing on them to close those critical skills gaps. This includes upskilling, transferring, recruiting, or restructuring activities. Some of these we modeled in the workforce plan a few moments ago. And essentially, the objective here is to reduce the variance between our workforce plan supply and our workforce plan demand as much as possible, if not all the way down to zero. And we want to approach this analysis from a headcount and a talent perspective. So we can see that there is a summary of our regional sales manager being included as a succession planning candidate. And then we have the 3 individuals that we also designated as new hires or new positions in our workforce plan. Now, with that being said, there's always going to be a cost component to consider as well for all these various workforce actions. And once again, this is where we can leverage historical actuals data, either from our core HCM system of record or external solutions, to create assumptions around the average cost associated with each one of these actions. And furthermore, as we saw earlier, creating a new plan version takes seconds. Now, this allows workforce planning participants to quickly and easily compare and contrast different scenarios against each other and then assess the sensitivity or the impact of the underlying changes that they are proposing prior to executing on them. This in turn will allow organizations to determine the optimal mix of headcount, talent, and cost required to achieve organizational goals and objectives.